Hey, welcome, guys. I hope you guys are doing well and staying safe in whatever part of the world you're in. And welcome to another episode of M&A Stories. And fortunately for us, we are also being joined by our co-host, Marcella Hall. Hey, Marcella.
Hey, Anirban, how are you? Happy Friday.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy Friday. And the other thing, of course, is we are quite excited to have a new guest in our interview today, somebody who's spent years in other countries. He is cross-cultural by birth, and he's worked in different parts of the world, and he's got some very interesting stories to talk with us. So we are privileged to have Richard Vincent to join us. Hey, Richard, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Anafan. Same here. Nice to meet you, Marcella.
Nice to meet you, Richard.
Absolutely. So why don't we get started with a brief background, brief history, introduction about you. You've got a very, very colorful background there.
Thank you, Anafan. Well, listen, I'm a leadership consultant. I mean, that's a short version. But I bring 25 years of experience, national in the Netherlands, but I think I work with the bigger leadership consulting and search firms in Europe and Asia. I've been in senior management positions in Europe and for Asia Pacific with some of the big public listed brand names.
Excellent, excellent. As you know, our M&A Stories, we want to talk about uncertainties that organizations face, and plus you've got a wider, broader experience as well. Right. So we may also bring in some of the stories from other kinds of transformation that we are involved in. So, but let's get started on your perspective on different kind of uncertainties that exist.
Yeah. So if you look at the different kind of uncertainties, what I've seen, let's say, Dutch companies acquiring other Dutch companies. I've seen American companies acquiring European companies, and what you see over there is that. For me, it's all about leadership. If the leadership, if you acquire a company, what is your objective and how are you gonna make it work? And what I see is that the starting point of many firms, very many companies, is that they take themselves as a frame of reference. So they go in with the Dutch glasses, with a Dutch mindset, acquiring a company in the UK, acquiring a company in China, acquiring a company in Brazil, but with the Dutch glasses on. And there things go wrong. And I've seen this also with, let's say, Japanese companies acquiring American companies, or in all kind of cultures, I've seen this. And I think this is something, if you talk about uncertainty, how do you handle this from a company perspective? What do you need to do to make sure that you don't make mistakes? Because if you go in with your Dutch mindset to acquire a company in the UK, the culture in the UK is different from the Netherlands. The thinking is different, the acting is different. So you set up to that things will not go right. And that's a pity.
You had mentioned before, too, the 3 building blocks towards building a successful company, a successful business, as leadership, strategy, and organizational culture. So really just kind of underscoring the organizational culture there. You could have 2, but without the 3rd, you're really, not necessarily enabling success.
Exactly. Yeah. So it starts with leadership. Leadership influences strategy, defines the strategy, and leadership can also define the culture. How do we behave? How do we act together as a team? Are we all individuals? Are we all silo thinking and acting? Are we working as one collective leadership team? And this is something which is key for leadership to realize, that they influence and define the strategy, whether it's an acquisition. And if they do this, okay, if you acquire this company, what you see a lot in America is that Americans, they pay, so they determine, okay, how things are done. And the Europeans, they are not used to this. I've got a recent example of a European CFO who came to me, and he said, "Yeah, we're acquired now by an American company, and there's private equity behind it, and yeah, we're struggling with the American culture because they're not empathic. They don't show empathy. They're more numbers driven and focus on the facts. And the Dutch are more, and the Europeans are more consensus driven. So there's a clash already on culture. And if you don't tackle this and discuss this up front from if you are acquired by Americans and you know this is going to happen, let's have that conversation. And the other way around, put on your glasses, take the other one as a starting point, and don't take yourself as a starting point.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great example that you shared, Richard. In fact, I've in my experience when I was involved with Asian acquirers acquiring European companies, it was kind of the reverse because in Europe, to your point, it's consensus, but in Asia, it's first about relationship building, but at the
Correct.
same time, there is a consciousness about hierarchy, who sits where, who sits at what chair at the table. I mean,
Correct.
simple things like those can easily flare up into cultural clashes in an acquisition. So great to hear those examples.
Yeah, and the intentions can be, sincere and with a good intention, but doesn't have to be the right thing to do, right? If you talk about Chinese people, for example, the highest in hierarchy must sit opposite the one who's the highest as well in rank. And if this is not the case, then they don't think it's respectful.
Yeah, absolutely. I also see, I remember an example where we had who will pay the bill, and this was always, it is the highest ranking in hierarchy is the person who ends up paying. And if you are a guest, you can never pay, and that's the kind of the Asian attitude versus the European where, hey, I have, if I'm the guest, then whether I pay or not, it's my discretion. But some very, very interesting example. But go on, we'd love to hear more stories from you.
Good. So what else would you like to hear from me?
Yeah, I think you mentioned about leadership. Let's try and do a bit more deeper dive onto the leadership aspect, right? I mean, because you mentioned about some of the smaller companies where it's the leadership that kind of embodies the cultural manifestation that needs to take place in organization. And what we see is, especially in the smaller companies, the leadership is the culture, and the culture is the leadership. And when these companies get acquired by larger companies, the larger companies often think that the leader would exit the system, but the culture of that organization was the culture of the leader, and therefore it exists, right? So the leader moves out, and yet the culture remains fixated in the organization. How would organizations deal with that? What would be a good starting point for that?
Yeah, I think it starts with if it's the major shareholder who's bought by a bigger company, like you mentioned. I think it's important that the one who acquired the company really sets the tone and really sets the expectations for the company, what will happen and what will be the impact for the people they're going to work with. Because if this is not discussed up front, people will leave sooner than later, because they don't feel fitting and matching to that culture. So as a management and as an owner of a business, if you're a smaller business, you have to make sure that you discuss this upfront prior to the deal. But once the deal is done, you really have to make the transition, and you have to make a roadmap or a plan. Okay, how are we gonna do this integration, and what will be the impact for the company? Will it be left alone as it is, or will it be more integrated with systems, processes, as the bigger company has? And this is something which varies. I've seen different companies do different things.
Cool. And I think that makes sense. Marcella, you had some questions regarding some of the uncertainties in culture. Maybe it's a good time to ask Richard before he gets jaded.
Richard, I'm just curious as to, you've shared some examples already, but can you share what are some of the biggest examples you've seen where, there might have just been a huge culture mismatch? How was that noticed? How was it observed? And, ultimately, was there anything that took place to sort of try to resolve the situation, decision that was made or something else? Just curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, there are two examples coming to my mind right now. I start first with the smaller one. It's a Dutch company. They're in the, let's say, investor business, and they're investing in other companies. And in the Netherlands, two of the same sort of companies were merging together. And you think, okay, the business is the same. They're all playing soccer, or they both are in investing in companies. But the decision styles. One was more hierarchical. There was a clear hierarchy in decision making, while the other company was more about consensus decision making. So when those two merged, it didn't work out because they didn't discuss upfront, okay, how we're going to take decisions, how we're going to run this company moving forward, and what will be the impact for everyone. So this is one. And another one I've experienced when I spoke to the CEO of a large, was a Singapore logistics company, and he said, "I've got everything in place, except for one thing, I want to do something about culture." And for me, it was a little bit strange that he said this, because for me, culture is involved in everything the company does and everyone does. And they are in 5 continents. So, and this company was acquired by a Japanese company. And this is what I've seen from more CEOs, that they think everything will be fine, it will not go that fast, the changes, etc. But when I ask more questions to the CEO, so did they bring in already more Japanese executives into the company? Yes, on finance, yes, on this, yes, on that. And this for me are signals already that things are changing. But the CEO felt, okay, hey, results are still good. I'm not worried that things will change, but I already sense and feel that, okay, things will change and it will go faster than you think. And this is one of my relatives' family has been a CEO in a family business in Asia. And you have to be very careful what you say, to owners, because people make their own assumptions about what do you mean with things, or they make their own story. And yet, therefore, you have to be very careful in how you act with the board and with the leadership.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and especially in Asia with hierarchy being in place, and also the do's and don'ts. What can you say versus what can't you say? When can you say? Under what circumstances can you say? All of that plays out. Now, this is the kind of skill that it may not necessarily be there around all the time. And I'll also broaden this question. How does a company manage to get these done through, just have internal resources only, or would they also want to bring in, or should they bring in external resources to manage?
I think this is also a big difference from where you are. I mean, in the Netherlands, you live now in the Netherlands, Anne, you see that people all want to do everything by themselves. Whether it's their house, whether it's the garden, whether it's their business, they want to do everything by themselves because they don't want to. Why spend money if it's not necessary, if they can do it ourselves? While in Germany, I lived also in Germany for 3 years. They want to pay. They want to pay for quality. So if you're good and you're an expert in your field, they prefer to put an expert there and make it happen. And the same applies actually for Asia, where if you look at Indonesia, if you look at Singapore, people are willing to pay for strategy consultants. People are willing to pay for experts because they are the experts in their field. Why? Because you've got so many people in Asia, and make sure you search for the right expert to help you reach your goals. When I was living in Singapore, if you go to the IKEA here in the Netherlands, you have to do everything by yourself. You have to pick it up. You have to make the desk yourself. But if you're in Singapore, 4 people come to your house and they make the bed or something you bought. They do it for you because they've got people for that, and you do your own thing. You make sure that you're the expert in what you're doing.
Right.
I love those analogies.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I hope this answers the question. I think you need experts. You need to, and of course it depends, but it depends on the country where you live, and it depends on what is the issue.
Right. And I know Marcella has a question to ask, but before you ask, Marcella, there's one question which is kind of dear to me. In Asia, a lot of times the top boss, or the CEO, or whosoever, the chairman of the company, they believe that they know it all, which is kind of a mental block. It's like, what can you teach me? I've seen it all, I've done it all, I've known it all, right? How do you bring in the sort of realization, the kind of education where you just talked about, hey, I need a strategist, a business strategist, but often they don't necessarily give enough importance to cultural strategists or the people who can bridge culture, especially in M&A. How would you advise companies to go about navigating that challenge?
Is this for me or for
Yes,
Marcella?
yes, yes, yeah, yeah. No, Marcella has another question, but for
Okay.
you, Richard, yes.
Well, what I did, and I know you're a fan of this model as well. I call it the competing values framework of Quinn, and you mentioned it. You call it the
Cameron Quinn, because these were the
Cameron and
two
Quinn. Correct.
authors,
Yeah.
yes.
So what I did when I was based in Singapore and had my own venture after I left Corn Ferry, I worked with this model, and there I measured cultures in companies like big Fortune 500 companies. I don't want to mention the name, but anyway, and with this, I could show them quickly, okay, what's your current culture today, and what is your strategy, and what's the gap? What's the gap between who you are, what are your values you're saying you have, and what's the gap with your strategy? And based on this, I could quickly assess in 12 minutes if people are filling in the assessments, okay, what is the gap and what do we need to do? And then people, because it's evidence-based, they like it very much.
I think that's a great example. Marcella, sorry, I took your question away.
No, I love that example. Evidence-based, collecting data, right? Assessing two different organizations or in comparison to the strategy, and
Correct.
making it very data driven, I think is fantastic. What I was going to ask, you had mentioned, Richard, Singapore and Germany, and I know you had also mentioned that you had lived in, I think, like 4 countries over the span of 9 or 10 years. I was just curious if you could share a little bit more about that, and certainly any comparison, contrastment that you have from those experiences.
Yeah. Of course, my frame of reference is the Netherlands because I was born in Amsterdam, but my parents were born from the Dutch colony, Indonesia. So I've got some Eurasian heritage. My last name is French, so 17th century. So I've got a lot of culture mixture in me. But if I remember Singapore, it's about the 3 C's: cash, car, credit card. This is how it started when I went there in 2007. And you have to look at that company and that the way it was built in the 50s. They didn't have a toilet. They didn't have, and the dream was to be like America, so that everyone has a house and a car in front of them. But Singapore was like a swamp. It was not much, and they really built the country from scratch to one of the, for me, one of the best countries in the world. And if you want to win and compete in that country with so many people over there, you have to really adapt to, okay, what are the trends over here? How do people behave? What do they like? And because I'm, of course, a little bit Asian, they think I'm a local, except when I speak, then they hear I'm not local. But anyway, so you have to make the connection with them, and this is key. So in Germany, if I go to another country, Germany, it's very important that you speak the language. So you have to, and I only had high school German, which is okay, but I didn't have the business education in English, in German. So you have to learn, you go to a school, to learn the language, to speak it better. And you have to start the conversations with executives in German. So also there, you learn quickly. If you go to the Netherlands, let's say you drive Mercedes. If I drive an E-Class Mercedes, then in the Netherlands, they give you a lower version because it's cheaper. But what do they do in Germany? They give me the S-Class. Why? Because they want me to buy that S-Class later on. And also in Germany, you've got a limousine service, so they pick you up with the S-Class, with the Audi A8, etc. So the bigger your car, the better you do it in their opinion. While in the Netherlands, it's not like this. You need to drive a Volvo. You need to be, don't put your head above the, how do you say it? The field. I don't know how to say it in English. Anyway, so these are different cultures, and you have to adapt all the time to the way people behave and act, to make impact with what you do.
I think that's a great I think that's a great example that you shared already, because the Dutch, the German, and the Singaporean one as well. And in fact, I remember one conversation where we had German and Dutch being involved in a transaction. The funny thing is, the Dutch, even at the most serious meetings, have a tendency of cracking jokes, whereas in German, that whenever there's a serious discussion, everybody is serious.
The Germans are very much about hierarchy. When I was living in Germany, I did a search for a CEO position for a Swedish company, and a Swedish CEO came to Germany, and he went into that office and said, "Hey, what is the table doing there?" He went to the bathroom, he came back, table was gone. So this is the German style of, we follow the order of the boss. And this is one example of working with German colleagues. You hear different stories than the stories we heard in the Netherlands about the past. So it's very interesting to learn about other cultures, what drives them, what's their frame of reference, and how can you relate? Because in the end, it's all about building rapport, building relationships, and see if you can influence and do business together.
So being flexible and adaptable sounds like it's pretty important.
Correct.
Speaking of uncertainties, because you mentioned about uncertainties in the world of M&A, but you've also been involved in other transformations as well. How would you compare and contrast with other transformations, whether it's geographic expansion, organization restructuring, or even ERP implementation?
Yeah. So what I've seen, and this is for many multinationals, I've seen that they send people who are doing well in the country, in the home country, or in a different continent. They send them to, let's say, Asia. And I've seen examples of big companies where the leadership, the board, isn't able to connect all the countries to the strategy. And this has to do with a lot with the frame of reference again, and their leadership style. And if you want to win in China, India, ASEAN region, or Australia, New Zealand, these are all different countries and different cultures. So there's not one size fits all, like maybe in Germany, this is the way we do things. If you go and work abroad, then things are done differently. Also Dutch companies, when they like to have meetings with their feet on the table, to have an open brainstorm meeting, which is quite normal in Holland. Just relax, just talk out loud and come up with all kind of ideas. But in Asia, it doesn't work like this. So, and this is what I've seen, is that if people are sent abroad as a leader, then really understanding the culture, where you're going, relate with the people, what's going well, what are the challenges, start with them, start with the people first, and then try to execute your strategy. Versus, this is our strategy, and now you have to adapt. You're laughing, Michelle, I see.
I'm smiling because that's great advice, right? You can't just go in with your perspective and just try to steamroll it out, right? You have to build the relationships and understand the culture. You should, do your due diligence up front before you even go into that new location, so that you have a heads up on, what you might encounter and what you should, common customs, just the way people work together, behaviors, all of that. So you can kind of be prepared when you're moving into that situation.
But this is something, and I think this is also one of the topics I'm very passionate about, is leadership. And leadership is, what is your objective? When I was younger, I'll be honest, for me, it was all about results, being the best, being the number one. I've been there a couple of times in different companies in different countries. But when I get older, it's not about that. It's about how can you develop people, that they become better in what they're doing. If they are becoming better, you will shine as well. So it becomes more like, let's say, servant leadership, where you have to make sure that people are successful. If people are successful, then you're also successful. And this is something what I see also with the younger generation of leaders, that they like this very much. So then you go in the country or the region where you have an assignment to do, to turn around or to launch a new business. But your starting point is different. Your internal motivation is different.
Absolutely, and I think the whole aspect of sort of motivation, this cultural interventions becomes extremely important in any transformation. Now, you mentioned about the model that I call Cameron Quinn, the competing values model. I think without sort of speaking a bit more about that model, would be unfair for our listeners. So if you could just elaborate on what that model is, and then we'll kind of wrap up our show today. So will that work for you?
Yeah, sure, no problem. I mean, Cameron Quinn, they came up with, there are actually four management models. You've got companies who are very much results driven. It's all about the numbers and achieving the goals. On the bottom left, you've got the companies who are very much process driven, like German companies, just follow the process and results will come. On the top left, so it's like a circle. On the top left, you've got the companies who are very much focused on people. If you just make sure that the people are fine, then the results will come. And on the top right, it's about innovation and entrepreneurship. There's someone like Steve Jobs, who has been very much about what's the next new product for Apple. And he's focused very much on innovation. But as a company and as a leader, you have to be round. You have to be end results, and process, and people, and innovation. So based on that model, and then this was the conclusion from Cameron Quinn, you need all the four management models in a company, but also as a business leader. So you have to be balanced. You can't be spiky on this and low on this. And as a company, you also, if you look at your values, you have to make sure that you play on all the four quadrants actually as a company. So this model helps to identify, okay, what are the gaps? This model helps to identify what needs to be done to make our company more in balance. Or if this is our strategy, what kind of competences, what kind of skills do we need to, if you want to play football and you've got only defenders in your team and you want to play attack, you need to have people who can play attack as well, right? So and this is the way you can look at your company. This is the way how you can look at your teams. This is the way how you can look at your culture. And I've got the assessment tools to measure that and then to make the changes.
In fact, the Cameron Quinn model is one of the models that I include in my masterclass on M&A integration. And Marcella, you remember the discussion where we talked about different companies or different kinds of companies, different culture, even at a functional and a team level. So the values are there. So it's an excellent tool for cultural assessment. And for our viewers and listeners, we're going to put the details of the framework as well as what framework Richard has in our show notes in the description below. But it's a great tool. Marcella, I know you have last couple of questions that you may want to ask, and then we'll wrap up our show.
Thanks, Anirban. So Richard, looking ahead, is there, when you think about the future of M&A, any thoughts on where you see things evolving in the future?
If you look at M&A and if you look at activity in Europe today, it's huge. You see a lot of acquisitions happening, and I'm talking to a lot of companies over here who are in the M&A field. But I think if you look at integration, M&A integration, for me, the key thing is all, again, about leadership and culture, and what is the strategy of that company. And that must be aligned. If that's not aligned, then things can go wrong, which is a waste of money, a waste of time for everyone. So this is, for me, a key thing.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Excellent. And I guess this brings us to my penultimate question. Any final thoughts for our listeners and viewers before we step to the last question?
I think if you're working in a company that is acquired or you're acquiring a company, my advice would be take off your glasses, I mean, and put on the glasses of the investor. If you know who's your boss and you know what drives your boss, if you know that, you can influence that, right? But if you only think about yourself, then it doesn't work. So for the company that acquires, I know you maybe want to do a buy and build strategy. You want to acquire and build on top of it, so you can do an exit later where you can do a great multiple. I know that's your goal, but how to achieve that is working, in my opinion, with the people, with the leadership, and with the culture to achieve that goal.
That's a wonderful way to summarize what we talked about today. I'm sure some of the listeners would like to continue this conversation. What's the best way they can get in touch with you?
Well, they can call me. My number is +316 577, and then I have to look at my number. No, but email is fine. richard.vincent@riviant.com. Riviant.com, RIVIONT.com is my website. You can see also my services, what I do. My clients are international companies, private equity, portfolio companies of private equity, and the financial professional services firms. So
excellent.
Thank you very much.
We're going to put these details in the description box, so we'll put your number as well if you want for numbers. But this was awesome. Thank you so much, Richard, for joining us and sharing your thoughts on culture aspects. Especially, I love the stories from Asia and then the German stories as well. I'm sure, Marcela, you loved it as well.
I did. Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you for having me both, and I wish you a good weekend.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey, Marcela, I think that was a great session. We got a lot of insights from Richard. What do you think?
I loved the session. It was awesome to hear about Richard's super diverse background and experiences living in so many different countries. I learned so much. Hope we get to chat with him again. And wanted to also give a shout out for any viewers and listeners out there. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and please give us a like. We're also out there on 7 different podcast channels, so be sure to find us there as well. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Marcela. And I absolutely enjoyed it. And it's been fun posting with you. And I look forward to doing a lot more. So with that, I would wish everybody stay healthy, stay safe, wherever you are in the world. Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.